The first time I realized something was seriously wrong was when I opened my garage door at 6 in the morning and found a silver Lexus SUV already sitting inside. Not in the driveway, not blocking the curb like the usual HOA offenders did when they had parties, but right there in my garage, like it belonged there. For one disorienting second I thought I had blacked out and bought a Lexus overnight, but the plates made it clear. Not mine. I stood there in the morning chill, coffee steaming in my hand, staring at this audacity on wheels. That's when I saw the outline of someone in the driver's seat, head tilted back as if they'd decided my garage was a bed and breakfast. And then the head snapped forward, and I was staring at none other than Karen, the neighborhood tyrant who thought her HOA badge was a sheriff's star. She fumbled with the door handle, too proud to look startled, and declared, "Oh good, you're awake. I needed somewhere safe to park for the night. You're welcome that I chose your garage. Less risk of vandalism here." She actually smiled, as if she'd just donated to charity. My brain short-circuited. This woman had not only trespassed but decided she was doing me a favor by using my space like some kind of free valet lot. I wanted to ask 100 questions. Why my garage? Why at night? How did she even get in? But all I managed was a flat, "You're parked in my garage." Karen's smile widened like she'd been waiting for that line. "Yes, because your driveway is technically community property, and by extension, garages that connect directly to it can be considered accessible during overflow events." Overflow events? At 6 in the morning? I glanced around, half expecting to see the HOA board crouching in my shrubs with a copy of the bylaws. Nothing but silence, dew, and my growing rage. The coffee was no longer enough. I put the mug on my tool bench, squared my shoulders, and said, "Karen, you're going to move your car right now." She rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might pull a muscle. "Relax. I'll only be a few hours. I have a very important brunch with the HOA president, and all the good spots near the clubhouse fill up fast. You wouldn't understand, but my time is valuable." This was classic Karen logic, where her time outweighed everyone else's existence. I could already imagine the way she had driven up to my property in the middle of the night, typed some secret code into my keypad, and helped herself to my garage. Except there was one problem with that image. My keypad wasn't installed. I never trusted them. That meant she had broken in. And if she had broken in, she had no idea what was already sitting just a few feet behind her Lexus. From where I stood, I could see the covered vehicle parked at the far end of my garage, dark blue tarp stretched tight over its shape. Karen didn't glance at it. She probably thought it was some project car, maybe a dusty old pickup or tractor. She had no idea. The sheriff's SUV wasn't just any government-issued vehicle, it was my brother-in-law's, parked here while his driveway got repaved. He was due to pick it up later today, and I had promised to keep it safe. Safe did not include entitled neighbors camping out with their luxury SUVs like squatters. I leaned casually against the workbench, masking my amusement. "Karen, you might want to check what you're parked next to." She squinted, then actually laughed. "What, that heap under the tarp? Don't tell me you're one of those men with a midlife crisis car. Oh dear." She chuckled to herself, smug as ever, like she was the one owning the punchline. That was the moment I decided not to argue. Not yet. Let her stew in her own arrogance. I simply said, "Fine. Stay parked. But don't say I didn't warn you." Then I shut the garage door with her still inside. For a few minutes, I let the silence settle, sipping my coffee in the driveway. I pictured her sitting there, wondering if she had finally pushed me too far. But entitlement is a drug, and Karen was fully addicted. By the time I reopened the door, she was humming to herself, touching up her lipstick in the rearview mirror as if my garage was her personal dressing room. That's when my brother-in-law, the sheriff himself, pulled into the driveway. Not in uniform, just in jeans and a jacket, but the presence was unmistakable. Karen froze mid-stroke with the lipstick, her face draining of color as he stepped out. He tilted his head toward the garage, confused. Why is there a Lexus next to my vehicle? The silence that followed was glorious. Karen stumbled out of the car, suddenly meek, her voice shaky. Oh, Sheriff. I was just, ensuring neighborhood safety. You know, keeping an eye on things. Volunteering. She actually tried to spin it into a civic duty. My brother-in-law looked at me, then at her, then at the SUV with his department insignia barely concealed under the tarp. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. The authority was baked into his posture. Ma'am, you're trespassing in a private garage. Explain yourself before I treat this as what it is, breaking and entering. Her face went blotchy red. She stammered about brunch, about no available spaces, about community rights. Each excuse landed with less weight than the last, bouncing off the concrete floor like pebbles. Finally she turned those desperate eyes to me, silently begging me to bail her out. That was the sweetest part. I smiled just enough to twist the knife. Karen, you said you'd only be a few hours. Guess your time just ran out. My brother-in-law walked past her, lifted the tarp, and revealed the sheriff's SUV in its full, gleaming authority. The badge, the lights, the steel bars, everything. Karen's knees almost buckled. It wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of the one thing she couldn't boss around, the law. And it was parked in the very garage she had invaded. I half expected her to faint, but instead she tried one last desperate maneuver. She pointed at me and said, "He invited me. He said I could." I opened my mouth to deny it, but my brother-in-law cut in first. "You think I don't know my own brother-in-law well enough? Don't insult my intelligence." His tone was calm, but it might as well have been thunder. Karen's head dropped. The garage was silent except for the ticking of cooling engines. That silence was everything I had hoped for when I first saw her parked in my space. Because this wasn't just about a car or a garage. It was about lines crossed, boundaries ignored, and the intoxicating arrogance of someone who thought rules never applied to her. And now, she was face to face with the one SUV in the county that could teach her otherwise. As my brother-in-law shook his head and muttered something about paperwork, I leaned against the workbench again, coffee finally gone cold but satisfaction warming me just fine. The game had only just begun. Karen thought this was her boldest move yet. She had no idea it was just the opening act. The morning Karen parked in my garage should have been enough embarrassment to shut her down for a month. Most people would have packed their bags, written an apology card, maybe even baked a cake. Karen was not most people. By the following afternoon, she had transformed the whole fiasco into a story about how she was personally victimized by overreach, and how the sheriff's family misused their power against law-abiding homeowners. The rumor mill didn't take long. At the coffee shop on Main Street, I overheard two neighbors whispering about how Karen had bravely stood her ground against intimidation. By the time I left, 3 more had asked me what it was like having such intense family connections. The way gossip works around here, you could sneeze on Monday and by Friday someone would accuse you of orchestrating a flu epidemic. But this time, Karen wasn't content with whispers. The very next day, a flyer appeared on my mailbox. Not tucked in politely, taped across the front like some eviction notice. In bold black ink, it announced an emergency HOA meeting, garage usage and neighborhood safety concerns. At the bottom, in Karen's looping cursive, it read, "Attendance mandatory." I nearly laughed myself off the driveway. She had converted her trespassing into an agenda item. I should have ignored it. That was my first instinct. But ignoring Karen is like ignoring mold. You think it'll go away on its own, but by the time you notice again, it's in the walls. So that evening, I grabbed a seat at the clubhouse. The room was packed tighter than a church potluck. Karen stood at the front with a clipboard, projecting the smug authority of someone who had just convinced herself she was the victim. She opened with a dramatic retelling of her ordeal. According to her, she had parked in my garage only because she feared for her safety, what with strangers loitering and lack of available community parking. She glossed right over the part where she had forced her way inside my property. Then she dropped the kicker. We must consider adopting a rule that allows temporary garage access for overflow situations. Community needs should outweigh private hoarding of resources. Private hoarding. That was her label for me keeping my garage for my own car. The crowd murmured. A few nodded like this was a reasonable proposal. Others, thankfully, looked appalled. I kept my expression neutral, though inside my sarcasm was practically bouncing off the ceiling. When she finally gestured toward me and said, "Of course, our neighbor here may try to exaggerate what happened," I stood. I didn't raise my voice. That's never my style. Calm hits harder than shouting. Exaggerate? Karen, you broke into my garage at 6 in the morning. You parked next to a sheriff's vehicle. And when asked to leave, you lied and said I invited you. That's not exaggeration, that's a police report waiting to happen. The room snapped into focus. Whispers stopped. People shifted in their chairs. For a flicker of a moment, Karen's face lost its color. But she rebounded like a seasoned actor. What he fails to mention, she said with a saccharine smile, is that his family member in law enforcement used intimidation to scare me. I was frightened for my life. The drama was almost Oscar-worthy. Almost. Except the sheriff himself had walked in through the back door during her speech. He leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, letting her dig her own grave. When she finally noticed him, she froze mid-sentence, then blurted, "Oh, Sheriff, I didn't see you there." He gave her a flat stare. "You didn't see me because you were too busy fabricating." Then he looked at the room. "For the record, she trespassed. That's not community access. That's a crime. If any of you are confused about the law, I'll be glad to explain it in writing." The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice paper. Karen's smile twitched. She quickly pivoted, announcing she needed a short break. She practically ran from the room. I thought that might be the end of it, but I should have known better. Karen never retreats, she regroups. Over the next week, little things started happening. My trash cans, normally untouched, were suddenly found tipped over, garbage scattered. Packages I ordered arrived ripped open. A neighbor accidentally received my mail 3 days in a row. It didn't take a detective to connect the dots. Karen had shifted from public theatrics to private sabotage. I set up a motion camera on the garage. Sure enough, within 2 nights, it caught her creeping across my driveway at midnight, fiddling with the bins. She looked like a burglar in yoga pants. I considered sending the footage to the HOA, but then an idea struck me. Why not let her think she was getting away with it a little longer? The best revenge isn't immediate. It's letting the entitled build their own trap. That opportunity came faster than I expected. A few days later, she marched across my lawn in broad daylight, clipboard in hand. "I've filed a petition with the HOA," she declared, "to inspect your garage for safety hazards. You could be hiding dangerous chemicals, illegal tools, or heaven knows what. For the good of the neighborhood, you'll have to allow access." I leaned against the porch post, arms folded. "You really want to inspect my garage, Karen?" She smirked. "Yes. It's my duty." I almost laughed. She thought she was about to uncover some scandal. What she didn't know was that my brother-in-law had left behind a second vehicle, an unmarked county car, as he rotated his fleet. And inside the garage, besides the car, was the evidence I'd collected, the footage of her midnight antics. So I smiled, stepping aside. "By all means, inspect away." She strutted past me like a queen entering her throne room, high heels clicking on concrete. She stopped dead when she saw the county car. Then her eyes darted to the monitor mounted above my workbench, looping video clips of her dumping trash and stealing mail. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I sipped my coffee, savoring the silence. "You wanted transparency, Karen. There it is. The sheriff gets the unmarked car, and you get the starring role in our little film festival." Her face twisted, caught between fury and panic. "You can't use this against me. This is harassment," she sputtered. I shrugged. Harassment would be me filing the report already. I haven't. Yet. For once, she had no comeback. She stormed out, but not before jabbing a finger at me. This isn't over. You'll regret humiliating me. And there it was, the threat. Entitlement always escalates when cornered. She had gone from parking in my garage to sabotaging my home, and now she had vowed open war. She had no idea how ready I was for it. Because what Karen didn't understand was simple. She wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting the law, the neighbors she'd alienated, and her own crumbling reputation. As I closed the garage door that evening, I couldn't help but smile. The boardroom theatrics were behind us. The petty sabotage was documented. And Karen had declared a battle she couldn't possibly win. She thought she was still in control. She had no clue she was standing at the edge of her own downfall, one I planned to make spectacular. The game was moving to its next stage, and this time I wouldn't play defense. By the time Chapter 2's dust settled, I figured Karen might lick her wounds for a while. That's what a rational person would have done after being caught on video sabotaging a neighbor's property and nearly incriminating herself in front of a sheriff. But Karen wasn't rational. Karen was nuclear. And within a week, she had turned her humiliation into a campaign. It started with glossy pamphlet. Yes, glossy. The kind you'd expect from a realtor, not a neighbor in a subdivision HOA war. Every mailbox on our street got one. On the front, in full color, was a picture of a child riding a bike. Across the top in bold letters, "Is your family safe? Demand accountability." Flip it open, and there I was, my actual house, circled in red like a crime scene. The text accused me of harboring hazardous vehicles and stockpiling suspicious materials. There was even a section titled, "A Threat Next Door," listing made-up infractions. Noise complaints, water misuse, unsanctioned landscaping. None of it true. I'd seen smear campaigns in politics, but this was the first time I'd been the target of one in a cul-de-sac. The kicker? At the bottom of the pamphlet was a petition demanding permanent HOA oversight of my garage. In other words, Karen wanted official permission to snoop whenever she felt like it. The neighbors' reactions split down predictable lines. The people who already hated Karen rolled their eyes and tossed the pamphlets straight in the trash. But a few newer families, who hadn't yet seen her true colors, seemed concerned. At the mailbox one morning, a nervous mom asked me if I really had barrels of chemicals in my garage. I laughed it off, but inside I felt the sting. That's how Karen worked. She didn't need proof, just enough whispers to plant seeds of doubt. The sheriff, of course, wasn't amused. When I showed him the pamphlet, he shook his head. "She's one step away from a defamation suit." He offered to confront her directly, but I told him no. If I let law enforcement handle it, Karen would spin it as intimidation again. Better to play it smart. I wanted her to dig deeper, to overextend until even her allies saw the truth. Sure enough, the next escalation came at the monthly HOA board meeting. I usually avoided those like the plague. Arguing over paint swatches and hedge heights wasn't my idea of a good time, but this month's agenda had my name all over it. I walked into the clubhouse to find Karen at the front, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd been strong-armed into attendance. She had a projector, slides, and, believe it or not, charts. "Fellow homeowners," she began, clicking to the first slide, which displayed a grainy still image of my garage camera footage. Somehow, she'd gotten her hands on a blurry copy, probably by leaning over someone's shoulder and snapping a phone pic during one of her nightly prowls. This shows the kind of secretive surveillance our neighbor is conducting. Ask yourself, who is he watching? What is he hiding? I almost laughed out loud. She had flipped the narrative completely, painting herself as the victim of Big Brother. The irony was so thick I could have paved the parking lot with it. When the board gave me a chance to respond, I kept it simple. Yes, I have cameras. Because someone, Karen, kept trespassing, vandalizing my property, and stealing mail. I have video evidence of it. which, by the way, I've already provided to law enforcement." The room buzzed. Karen's face went red. "That's not true," she shrieked. But murmurs from the back made it clear some folks weren't convinced anymore. One man even called out, "If he has proof, let's see it." I didn't bring the footage with me, it wasn't the place. But the sheriff, who had slipped into the meeting halfway through, stepped forward. "I've seen the footage. It's real." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His word was enough. Karen's composure cracked. Her voice rose, shrill and desperate. "You can't take his side just because you're related. This whole community is being manipulated by a family clique." She was practically shaking, her finger jabbing the air like she was testifying at a witch trial. That should have been the climax. But Karen wasn't finished. She had one more stunt lined up, and she saved it for maximum drama. She pulled out a manila envelope and slapped it on the podium. "This is a formal complaint filed with county zoning. If approved, it will force an inspection of his property. Then we'll all see what's being hidden behind that garage door." The room gasped. The board looked uneasy. Even the sheriff frowned. Filing a zoning complaint wasn't illegal. It was just petty, invasive, and time-consuming. And it meant I'd soon have inspectors poking around, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because Karen wanted her revenge. Driving home that night, I thought about giving in to the frustration, maybe even fighting fire with fire. But that wasn't my style. Karen's strength was noise, drama, and spectacle. Mine was patience. The inspection would come. They'd find nothing illegal, nothing dangerous. And when they did, Karen's credibility would crumble a little more. The day of the inspection arrived quicker than I expected. 2 county officials showed up with clipboards, polite but clearly uncomfortable. They looked around the garage, noted the tools, the shelves, the workbench. They peeked at the unmarked county car and exchanged glances, but said nothing. After half an hour, one of them sighed. "Everything looks in order. Frankly, this complaint doesn't hold water." Karen had been hovering outside the whole time, pretending to prune her roses but really craning her neck. When the inspectors left, she stomped across the lawn. "How much did you pay them off?" she hissed. I just smiled. Not a cent. Turns out telling the truth is cheaper. She glared at me, then said the words that told me we were only at the halfway point of her spiral. "If the system won't protect us, I'll have to take matters into my own hands." I closed the garage door slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact. Inside, my mind was already turning. If she thought pamphlets, smear campaigns, and zoning complaints were her strongest weapons, she had no idea how outmatched she was. Because the more she escalated, the more she revealed. Every tantrum, every stunt, it all fed into the pattern I was documenting. And sooner or later, Karen was going to hand me the exact rope I needed to tie the knot on her downfall. The neighborhood was growing restless. People who once humored her were now tired of the circus. Packages were still going missing, lawns mysteriously trampled, mailboxes dented. Everyone suspected Karen, but no one wanted to confront her directly. That's when I realized the war had expanded. It wasn't just me anymore. It was the whole street. And Karen had just declared herself the general of a battle she couldn't possibly win. As the sun set that night, I poured myself another coffee, leaned against the garage wall, and looked at the sheriff's SUV gleaming under its tarp. Karen thought it was just a vehicle. She didn't see it for what it really was, a symbol. A reminder that no matter how much noise she made, the law and the truth weren't on her side. And if she wanted to test that truth, I was more than ready. If Karen's glossy pamphlet campaign and bogus zoning complaint had been her opening acts, Chapter 4 of this neighborhood opera was the moment she wheeled in the full orchestra. She was no longer satisfied with making me the villain in gossip circles or embarrassing me at HOA meetings. Now she wanted spectacle, and she wanted an audience. The first clue came on a Thursday evening when I noticed a new sign staked into her front lawn. Big red letters screamed, "Community Watch Headquarters." Underneath, in smaller type, protecting you from hidden dangers. She had even taped clip art of a magnifying glass and a shield, as if Canva could transform her into law enforcement. The irony was lost on her, of course. By the next morning, I saw folding chairs set up in her driveway and a plastic table stacked with store-brand donuts and coffee. She had scheduled meetings and lured neighbors in with sugar and caffeine. I didn't attend, but word traveled fast. Karen was warning everyone about suspicious late-night activities on my property, claiming she'd seen trucks pulling in at odd hours. She spun stories about me stockpiling equipment, maybe even running an illegal repair shop. She had no evidence, but she had flair. Her voice carried, her hands waved dramatically, and fear, no matter how baseless, always finds buyers. One neighbor, a timid retiree, knocked on my door afterward. He apologized for asking but wanted to know if I was planning construction that might lower property values. I kept my answer short, nope, but Karen's planning a circus that might. He chuckled nervously, but his eyes betrayed concern. That was Karen's power, planting little weeds of doubt, watering them with paranoia, and hoping they'd strangle the truth. But paranoia works both ways. Karen wasn't just seeding fear in the neighbors, she was living it herself. That same night, my garage camera picked her up again, this time not vandalizing but loitering across the street. She crouched behind her mailbox, watching my driveway like she was on a stakeout. A street light buzzed above her, illuminating her face every few seconds, but she seemed oblivious. She stayed there almost an hour, scribbling in a notebook. I should have confronted her. Instead, I let her cook, because each move she made pushed her closer to the breaking point, and I knew I had the patience to wait. Her next play was bolder. 2 days later, a white pickup truck rolled into our subdivision carrying 3 men I'd never seen before. They weren't neighbors. Too young, too rough around the edges, and too eager to smirk when Karen greeted them. They parked in her driveway, and by evening, they were hammering together some kind of makeshift barricade, a wooden structure with a handwritten banner draped across it. "Stop the garage danger." I admit, I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Karen had staged a protest. In a cul-de-sac. Against a garage. By sunset, she had her hired muscle holding cardboard signs while she paraded around with a bullhorn. "This neighborhood deserves safety. We demand transparency," she bellowed, voice echoing off stucco walls. A few curious kids rode by on bikes, wide-eyed, but most neighbors closed their blinds. Nobody wanted to feed the madness. I stood in my driveway, arms crossed, just watching. Karen locked eyes with me and seized the moment. See how he refuses to answer? Refuses to open his garage? What is he hiding? Her bullhorn amplified every word, but her argument shrank under the sheer absurdity of the scene. The sheriff arrived not 10 minutes later. No sirens, no lights, just his SUV pulling up quietly. He stepped out, surveyed the ragtag protest, and sighed. "Karen, what exactly are you doing?" Her face lit up, as if she'd been waiting for this confrontation. "We are exercising our community rights. We are demanding inspection of this dangerous property before someone gets hurt." She gestured to her entourage like a general presenting troop. The sheriff looked at the men, then at the banner, then at me. "Dangerous property, huh?" He took a slow walk into my garage, glanced around at the neatly organized tools, the spotless floor, and the county vehicle still parked under its tarp. After about 30 seconds, he emerged. "Looks like a normal garage to me. Cleaner than mine, if I'm honest." Karen's face twisted. "You're biased. You're covering for him because he's family." The sheriff tilted his head. "You filed a zoning complaint. Inspectors came. They cleared it. You held an HOA meeting. The board dismissed it. Now you've brought strangers to trespass on private property with signs? You're one step away from a restraining order." The hired men exchanged uneasy glances. One muttered something about "not worth it" and shuffled toward the truck. Within minutes, Karen's grand protest dissolved into a lone woman waving a bullhorn at closed curtains. But if I thought that humiliation would slow her down, I underestimated the depths of her entitlement. The very next day, I found my mailbox door ripped off its hinge, letters scattered across the sidewalk. Inside one envelope, oddly not addressed to me, was a photo. Not of my garage, not of my house, of my wife. She was walking our dog, head turned mid-laugh. Someone had taken the picture from a distance. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a pamphlet. This wasn't a smear. This was personal. I showed the sheriff that evening. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing. She's crossed a line. I nodded. But if we move too soon, she'll spin it as harassment again. Let her push further. Let her show everyone who she really is. It was risky, maybe even reckless, but I knew Karen's pattern. She escalated until she overplayed her hand. And this chilling new tactic, was her most dangerous overreach yet. Sure enough, she doubled down. 2 nights later, the cameras caught her creeping along the side of my house, flashlight in hand, snapping photos of my windows. When I confronted her from the porch, she froze like a raccoon caught in the beam of headlights. Then she tried to bluster. "This is a safety inspection. You'll thank me when I uncover the truth." I just smiled coldly. "The truth, Karen? You're standing on my property at midnight with a camera. The truth is you're trespassing." Again. She scurried off, muttering threats. I let her go, because every second she stayed unhinged, every stunt she pulled, strengthened my case. And the case was no longer about parking in my garage. It was about harassment, stalking, and invasion of privacy. Neighbors began whispering again, but this time, the whispers weren't about me. They were about her. The kids on bikes told their parents about the crazy lady with the bullhorn. The retired couple down the street admitted they'd seen her rifling through trash bins. People were connecting dots, and all those dots pointed to Karen spiraling out of control. By the end of that week, she had officially isolated herself. And she knew it. I saw it in her eyes when she stormed across the street one last time, red-faced and trembling. She jabbed a finger at me and screamed, "This isn't over. You think you've won, but I will destroy you before I'm done." The quiet after her outburst was almost serene. Because by then, everyone else had heard her too. Curtains twitched, doors cracked open. The neighborhood was no longer blind to Karen's campaign. And I knew the climax was coming. She had shown her hand, and now she was cornered. People like Karen don't retreat gracefully. They implode spectacularly. Karen's meltdown in the cul-de-sac should have been the grand finale, the swan song of a woman out of ammunition. But if there's one thing I had learned, it's that Karen never stops when she's lost. She stops only when she's burned everything around her. Chapter 5 began with smoke, both literal and metaphorical. It was a Saturday morning, the kind where the air was crisp and quiet, everyone tending their lawns or sipping coffee on porches. I was in my garage, tightening a loose bolt on my workbench, when a neighbor pounded on my door, shouting, "Your shed's on fire!" My stomach dropped. I bolted outside to see smoke curling from the corner of my property where my old storage shed stood. It wasn't a raging blaze, more of a smolder, but the sharp smell of accelerant hit me immediately. This wasn't an accident. Someone had doused it. The fire department arrived fast, doused the embers, and confirmed what I already suspected. The burn pattern screamed deliberate ignition. They asked me if I had enemies. I nearly laughed. Did I have enemies? No. I had Karen. When the sheriff arrived, he didn't even need me to say her name. He'd already spotted her across the street, arms folded, watching the chaos with thinly veiled satisfaction. He walked over to her, calm but firm, and asked where she had been that morning. She launched into a dramatic retelling of how she had heroically called in the fire, even though the record showed it was my neighbor who dialed 911. Her story fell apart faster than wet cardboard, but she never stopped talking. That was Karen's defense mechanism: drown the truth in a flood of noise. The sheriff promised an investigation, but arson takes time to prove. Meanwhile, Karen strutted around like she had just survived a terrorist attack. She told anyone who would listen that the shed fire was actually my attempt to destroy evidence before the county inspection. She even whispered that the sheriff's department was covering it up. That's when I realized she wasn't just attacking me anymore. She was attacking my brother-in-law's badge. And if there's one thing Karen couldn't afford, it was poking a bear that big. The neighborhood began to fracture. Some people, mostly newcomers still charmed by her theatrics, believed her conspiracy talk. Others were disgusted and started avoiding her altogether. I overheard one couple muttering about putting their house on the market just to get away from the HOA circus. But Karen didn't see the division as a warning sign. She saw it as proof she was gaining traction. Her next stunt made the protest look tame. 3 nights later, floodlights flared to life in her yard. She had rented a projector and draped a bedsheet between 2 trees. And there, on a loop, she displayed blurry photos of my garage taken from her midnight prowls. Over the images, she blasted audio recordings of herself narrating like a true crime podcast. What's being hidden in this garage? Why is law enforcement complicit? Demand answers before it's too late. Neighbors emerged in robes and pajamas, squinting against the glare. Kids cried from the noise. One man yelled, "Turn it off!" But Karen kept going, convinced she was leading a revolution. I stood in my driveway, sipping coffee like I was watching an outdoor movie. If she thought this would shame me, she underestimated how ridiculous she looked. The sheriff arrived around midnight, lights flashing this time. He ordered her to shut it down. She screamed about censorship and community rights, but when he threatened to confiscate the projector as evidence of harassment, she wilted. The bedsheet came down. The floodlights flicked off. The crowd dispersed, grumbling. By morning, her antics were the only topic in the subdivision. And for the first time, people weren't laughing or whispering, they were angry. A group of neighbors knocked on my door, apologizing for staying neutral before. They admitted they'd seen her sneaking around. One man handed me a flash drive with footage from his doorbell cam showing Karen tampering with my trash bins at midnight. Another woman confessed she'd caught Karen yanking flowers from her garden weeks ago. The dam had broken. I compiled everything: my footage, the neighbors' clips, the projector stunt, even her absurd pamphlet. Then I sat down with the sheriff and laid it all out. He rubbed his temples and said, "I was trying to give her rope, but I think she's finally hung herself." He promised to take it to the county attorney. Karen must have sensed the walls closing in, because that afternoon she marched onto my lawn, bullhorn in hand, red-faced and trembling. "You think you can turn people against me?" she shouted. "You think your little sheriff friend can scare me? I'm not afraid of you. I'll prove you're a criminal if it's the last thing I do." I didn't rise to the bait. I just looked at her calmly and said, "Karen, you've mistaken my patience for weakness. That was your last mistake." Her eyes flickered, fear, just for a second, before the mask of arrogance slammed back into place. She hurled one more insult, then stormed off. The following week, the county attorney filed formal charges: harassment, trespassing, and malicious mischief, with arson under investigation. Karen went ballistic. She told everyone the charges were fabricated, that she was the victim of a grand conspiracy. But the harder she screamed, the fewer people listened. The real twist came when the HOA board, sick of the drama, called a vote. For the first time in its history, the board proposed expelling a member, revoking her authority and banning her from leadership. At the meeting, the room was packed. Karen tried to deliver another of her fiery speeches, but the murmurs drowned her out. When the vote was counted, the result was decisive. She was removed from her post. The look on her face when the announcement was made was priceless. Her power, her entire identity, was slipping through her fingers. But she wasn't done yet. She couldn't be. People like Karen don't accept defeat. They go down swinging. That night, my cameras caught her again, lurking in my driveway. This time, she wasn't just poking around. She was carrying a crowbar. She approached the garage, gripped the handle, and started to pry. Then the floodlights snapped on, bathing her in white. She froze, eyes wide, as the garage door opened from inside. And there it was, the sheriff's SUV, headlights flaring to life, engine rumbling like a beast woken from slumber. My brother-in-law stepped out, uniform crisp, badge gleaming. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Karen dropped the crowbar and bolted like a deer. I picked up the crowbar the next morning, laid it on my workbench, and smiled. She had just committed her boldest act yet, caught on camera, in full color, with audio. There would be no spinning this. No pamphlet, no projector, no bullhorn could rewrite the truth. Karen had declared war. But by the end of Chapter 5, it was clear. The war was already lost. By the time Karen stood frozen in my floodlight with a crowbar in her hand, you'd think she would have realized the game was over. Most people would have cut their losses, lawyered up, and quietly disappeared into damage control. But Karen's brand of entitlement doesn't recognize surrender, it only recognizes escalation. Chapter 6 began with her silence. Not the absence of noise kind, but the eerie pause in which you know someone's winding up for a bigger swing. For 3 days she disappeared. No bullhorn, no pamphlets, no late-night prowling. Her yard was eerily still, her blinds drawn, her driveway empty. Neighbors whispered that maybe she'd finally been spooked into retreat. Some even celebrated, clinking glasses on their patios like a storm had finally passed. I didn't buy it. Karen was like a pressure cooker, quiet only when the steam had nowhere left to go. I was proven right on a Tuesday morning when a moving van pulled into her driveway. Except she wasn't moving out, she was moving in equipment. From my porch, I watched delivery guys haul boxes into her garage, each stamped with labels like PA system and event supplies. By evening, the sound of drilling and hammering echoed across the cul-de-sac. 2 days later, her latest scheme revealed itself. At dawn, my garage camera picked up a new installation across the street, a towering aluminum frame draped with vinyl banners. In bold red and white they screamed, "Stop the danger next door," and "Expose the garage secrets." At the center was a giant printed photo, my house, with arrows pointing to the garage, circled in red like a crime map. By mid-morning, she had the PA system booming. "Good citizens of the neighborhood, your safety is at stake." Her voice blasted across the subdivision, distorted but unmistakable. She'd created her own one-woman protest stage. And worse, she'd invited outsiders. Cars I didn't recognize pulled up, and strangers unfolded lawn chairs. Some filmed with their phones. Karen had gone viral, or at least she was trying to. Neighbors were furious. One stormed over and yanked his kids inside, shouting at Karen to turn it off. Another yelled, "This isn't a neighborhood anymore, it's a circus." But Karen only smiled wider, microphone in hand. The truth is coming out. He can't hide behind family connections forever. I stayed calm. Losing my cool would only feed her show. Instead, I brewed another pot of coffee and sat in my driveway, sipping slowly, every camera rolling. By afternoon, the sheriff arrived. Not just him, 2 deputies in separate cruisers. The spectacle had finally crossed from nuisance to public disturbance. They ordered Karen to dismantle the banners and cut the sound system. She argued for nearly an hour, pacing, gesturing, tears welling up as if she were Joan of Arc being dragged to the stake. Eventually, the deputies pulled the plug themselves. The crowd dispersed, grumbling, some filming the entire takedown. But Karen wasn't defeated. The next morning, she filed an emergency injunction at the county courthouse. In her petition, she claimed I was harboring hazardous government property, and that the sheriff was illegally shielding family misconduct. She wanted a judge to grant her access to search my garage. When I got the notice, I nearly choked on my toast. The audacity was breathtaking. But then I saw the hearing date, Friday morning. Just 3 days away. Karen wasn't aiming for legal victory. She was aiming for spectacle. The courthouse was packed. Somehow, Karen had rallied her little fan club of outsiders, and they filled the back rows with homemade signs. She strutted in wearing a tailored blazer and pearls, looking like she'd prepped for a CNN interview. I sat calmly at the front with my brother-in-law and his attorney. The judge entered, unimpressed by the theatrics. Karen launched into her speech anyway, voice trembling with self-righteous fervor. She painted me as a dangerous hoarder, the sheriff as a corrupt relative, and herself as the brave whistleblower. Her words were dramatic, her hands fluttering like she was auditioning for Broadway. When it was my turn, I didn't bother with theatrics. I submitted the footage, her trespassing, her protests, her projector stunt, even her midnight crowbar attempt. Clip after clip rolled on the courtroom screen. Gasps rippled through the spectators. Karen's face drained of color with each video. The judge cut her off halfway through her rebuttal. "Mrs. Simmons, you've wasted this court's time with unsubstantiated claims and harassing behavior. This petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm ordering a restraining order pending further investigation." The gavel cracked. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her supporters muttered uneasily. For the first time, the stage she craved had swallowed her whole. Back at the neighborhood, word spread like wildfire. Restraining order became the phrase on everyone's lips. Some neighbors who'd once sat on the fence now crossed the street to shake my hand. "About time," one muttered. Kids laughed about the crazy lady who thought she was the FBI. Even the HOA board, previously hesitant, issued a statement condemning her behavior. But Karen didn't accept exile quietly. That evening, she stormed across my lawn one last time. She couldn't come within 30 feet of my property now, but she stood at the line, shaking with fury. Her voice cracked as she screamed, "You've ruined my life. Do you hear me? Ruined it. But this isn't over." I didn't move from my porch. I just said, calm as ever, "Karen, it was never me who ruined your life. It was you. All I did was give you enough rope." She glared at me, eyes wet, fists clenched, then turned and marched back into her house. The door slammed so hard it rattled windows. The neighborhood exhaled. Curtains fluttered open. For the first time in weeks, there was silence. Real silence, not the tense pause before the next storm. But I knew better than to think it was the end. Karen wasn't built to fade quietly. She would try one last desperate gambit, something reckless and catastrophic. And when she did, it wouldn't just expose her. It would finish her. Because by Chapter 6, everyone was watching. Every neighbor, every camera, every deputy. The spotlight she craved so badly was now fixed squarely on her, and there was nowhere left to hide. With quiet that felt wrong. For almost a week after the restraining order, Karen's house was silent. No banners, no bullhorns, no midnight creeping. She mowed her lawn, collected her mail, waved stiffly at passers-by like she was trying to play the role of ordinary neighbor. The cul-de-sac almost started to believe it. People lingered on porches again, kids rode bikes, even the retired couple walked their dog without scanning the shadows. The storm seemed to have passed. But storms don't vanish. They build. And when they finally break, they take everything with them. It happened on a Saturday night. I was in the garage working on a minor project, tightening a hinge, nothing fancy, when the sound reached me. Not the whir of an engine, but the crunch of metal meeting wood. I bolted outside just in time to see Karen's Lexus SUV ram halfway into my garage door. Sparks flew from the twisted panels, the entire frame groaning as if it might collapse. Behind the wheel, Karen's face was lit with a wild determination I'd never seen before. She reversed, tires screeching, and rammed again. Neighbors screamed. Porch lights flared on. The neighborhood, once lulled into thinking she'd calmed down, was thrust into chaos. I stood frozen for a beat, watching her third attempt. This wasn't trespass or vandalism anymore. This was a siege. On the fourth hit, the weakened garage door gave way. The Lexus lurched inside, headlights slicing through dust and shadows until they illuminated the sheriff's SUV parked at the back. Karen slammed the brakes, staring at it like it was her white whale. She stumbled out, hair wild, eyes blazing, and shrieked, "There! Proof! Proof he's hiding government property!" Her voice echoed, manic, bouncing off the concrete. She raised her phone, recording wildly, narrating to no one. "He's hiding it. He's guilty. I told you all." By then, half the cul-de-sac had gathered at the curb, phones out, recording everything. The sheriff himself arrived within minutes, summoned by frantic 911 calls. His cruiser screeched to a halt, and he stepped out slowly, hands steady, jaw tight. He didn't need sirens. The flashing phones of every neighbor were already documenting the madness. Karen spun toward him, triumphant. "I caught you! I caught you covering for him! You can't deny it now." She gestured wildly at the SUV, as if its very existence justified her crusade. The sheriff's voice was low, deliberate. "Karen, that's a county-issued vehicle, stored here temporarily with full authorization. You just committed felony destruction of property and trespassing in violation of a restraining order. Do you understand what you've done?" For once, her words faltered. The phone wavered in her hand. She looked from him to the crowd, expecting applause, expecting someone, anyone, to validate her insanity. But the faces staring back weren't nodding anymore. They were grim, horrified, even pitying. "Arrest him!" she screamed finally, pointing at me. Her voice cracked under the weight of desperation. "He's dangerous. He's manipulating you. You're all blind." No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was crushing. Then the sheriff pulled out his cuff. Not for me. For her. The moment they clicked around her wrists, Karen's scream shattered the night. "You can't do this. I'm the victim. This is my neighborhood. I am the HOA." Her words dissolved into sobs as deputies guided her into the cruiser. Cameras caught every second. Neighbors' phones, doorbell cams, even my own garage system. By morning, the footage had spread across social media faster than wildfire. Titles varied: Crazy HOA Lady Rams Neighbor's Garage, Neighborhood Karen Arrested Live, Entitlement Ends in Handcuffs, but the story was the same. Karen had written her own ending, and the internet had published it. The aftermath was almost anticlimactic. Insurance adjusters came, measured the wreckage, and promised a payout. Contractors replaced the garage door within days. My brother-in-law reclaimed the sheriff's SUV, shaking his head but secretly pleased at how neatly Karen had exposed herself. The HOA board, in a rare unanimous decision, voted to permanently bar Karen from any leadership role. Neighbors who had once hesitated now openly mocked her. The kids on bikes turned, "I am the HOA," into a chant, shouting it whenever they passed her empty driveway. Families toasted to "peace at last" during backyard barbecues. The community, once fractured by her drama, was suddenly united, bonded by the shared memory of her implosion. As for Karen, she was released on bail within a week, but the restraining order held firm. She slunk back into her house, blinds drawn tight. No signs, no bullhorns, no visitors. Just silence. Real silence this time. The kind that comes after a fire burns out, leaving only smoke and ash. One evening, I sat in my repaired garage, sipping coffee, when I noticed movement across the street. Karen stood at her window, peeking through the blinds. Our eyes met for just a second. There was no fire left in hers, no arrogance. Just the hollow stare of someone who'd gambled everything and lost. She vanished behind the curtain a moment later, and I knew then she was finished. I thought about all the twists, the trespassing, the pamphlets, the fake protests, the smear campaigns, the courtroom drama, the projector circus. Each one had been her way of trying to bend reality to her will. And each one had brought her closer to this, a lonely figure behind a curtain, remembered not as a leader or a fighter, but as the woman who declared herself the HOA and drove her Lexus into a garage to prove it. It would have been easy to feel pity. But pity requires respect, and Karen had spent every ounce of hers on entitlement. What I felt instead was relief. Relief that the neighborhood was free, that the storm had passed, and that my patience had paid off. Because in the end I never had to defeat Karen. She did it to herself. All I did was keep the cameras rolling. The final clip I saved was the one where the deputies led her away, neighbors' phones lighting the night, her voice echoing as she screamed, "I am the HOA." I replayed it once, then archived it, a digital trophy of entitlement undone. And with that, the story was over.